I think a lot of you have been part of a DRIVA Arts Driver event before, but some of you may not have done. So very briefly, DRIVA Arts Driver is a £1.6 million project led by the University of Brighton with funding from the European Regional Development Fund, Arts Council England, and working in partnership with a range of organisations to spark a superfusion of creativity, technology and business. So it's all around creative practice and technical innovation coming together with a kind of through the lens of big data and what value big data and small data can create. Part of that is around the extraordinary access that the project has to Gatwick Airport's real-time data. And if any of you did attend the event last week, you'll see how some artists have been using that as a stimulus to interrogate what transport and travel data means, which is really interesting. You'll find lots and lots of resources and information about other events and webinar recordings, plus access to university resources, to a brand new TV channel as part of the project, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end as well. And lots and lots more besides at drivaartsdriver.com. That really is the gateway to all of this, and everything is completely free. So I guess without much further ado, I'm really delighted to introduce this morning Dr. Alastair Goode, who's very kindly bringing his immense expertise and wisdom to you all. Dr. Alastair Goode is a cognitive scientist and is a key part of the immersive technology research organisation Gorilla in the Room, which I no doubt he will talk about what some of their recent innovations have been. I've been following them very much during the last few months through the kind of trade press around the work they've been doing with augmented reality, virtual reality, and in the retail sector, which is what drove me to get in contact with Alastair. So really chuffed that he can give us some of his time. So what we're looking at today is how VR in lockdown is helping companies forecast kind of real world habits and consumer habits, but I'm also reliably informed that we're going to delve into a lot more than that, looking at a kind of wider scope of the role of immersive technology in habit forecasting and understanding how people may behave in the future. So I think we're in for a treat. So I will hand over now to Ali. So if everybody could turn off cameras and microphones to give him spotlight, and then I'll bring you all back in later on, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the future events. But over to you, Ali.
Thank you. So I very much work in the world of consumer research. So I can give you a bit of a potted history. I started as an academic at Sussex University. Got very fascinated. I used to work in consciousness or non-conscious processing. Got rather excited by the idea of applying this to help people understand how commercial activity worked better. So moved over into the murky world of market research about 18, 19 years ago. And since then, I've been sort of trying to convince the world of market research that there's more to life than asking people direct questions, which I've done through various means, through any of you know about Danny Kahneman's work and System 1, System 2. I'm going to delve into a little bit of that. They do like to ask people direct questions, either on an internet survey or in a focus group. And there's plenty more you can do with that. But about 4 years ago, it was almost exactly 4 years ago, I was at the Fuse Box in Brighton and was talking, had some chap wander over to me and said, "Oh, you do research, don't you? Have you ever heard of Ipsos, who are like the third largest research company?" And he said, "Yeah, we're pitching to them this idea of sort of augmented and virtual reality." And I kind of went, "Oh, okay, that sounds interesting, let's have a chat." And I sort of sat in VR, went into VR and looked at AR, and I thought, blimey, this is going to revolutionize the industry. So I had to follow it. So for the last 4 years, we've been developing a technology company that basically gives market researchers the tools to to try and better understand consumer behavior, as well as looking at seeing these things as being new new media channels as well that are going to be ever more influential in the future. So that's a sort of a little bit of potted history of Gorilla in the room. Also to say that we're very much from the science and measurement side rather than the creative side. So if you're expecting wonderful creativity, I can probably sneak a slide in later, though I'll have to dig it out, of something we did which was creative a couple of months ago. But anyway, so the whole point of what we try and do is to get better prediction of consumer purchases by using immersive research and mobile platform to increase sales. That's what we do. But of course, to start off with, I mean, I'm assuming that you are all fairly au fait with what VR and AR is, but I'll just run through that quickly for those of you who may need a quick refresher. So of course, computing has been changing over the last 40, 50 years. I am sadly old enough to remember punch cards back in my childhood. And then it moved to keyboard, through to mouse and laptop, and then we get social media and then gesture on screen. And as you know, there are many, many companies who are backing visual technologies to be the next step forward. I mean, literally billions upon billions of pounds are flying into this left, right, and centre. So hence the reason why it seemed like a good idea to try and do something in it. Virtual reality, it's worth breaking it out. I mean, this is a bit of an old slide now. So we actually use Google Cardboard quite a bit, which I'll show you. We use Samsung Gear, I think it's been discontinued now, that's how old the slide is, and Daydream. So these are all 3D off, so that's where you're sitting from a fixed position. Always put this slide in because people need to know the difference between 3D off and 6D off, because with 6 degrees of freedom, you've got the kind of bigger Oculus-y, rifty things that you can plug into a computer, and you can move around with light boxes, with outside-in tracking. And the number of times we get asked if you can use Google Cardboard and move around the environment, we kind of politely point out that that's actually not possible. And then, of course, we've got the Oculus Quest. I just got an offer from my Facebook account to buy an Oculus Quest and order one this week. 300 quid for an Oculus Quest with inside-out tracking. It's becoming really cheap. Anyway, so that's the VR that we use. With augmented reality, again, I'm sure that you know that you can deliver it through devices. This is where we think our focus is going to be, because it's easier to deliver to the vast majority of people. And you've got other things like Magic Leap and Microsoft HoloLens. And if you haven't had a chance to try them, try Microsoft HoloLens. It is so impressive and so disappointing at the same time, because you can obviously see things that are in your environment, but it's like looking through a letterbox. I think it's getting better. Magic Leap I tried and I really wasn't terribly impressed by it. I think there's a few good IP bits in there, but it's not that good. Anyway, so I'm sorry to say, but before we even start talking about visual technology, if you're going to get me to give a talk, I have to bang on about psychology for ages. So there is a problem. There is a psychological problem with research. So the one I've been battling with for the last 20 odd years. So, as I say, research is done predominantly through 4 methods. You have an online survey where you send somebody an email on a panel. They collect these emailed addresses. You answer a load of questions. They get it back, and this is classic quant data. And there's telephone interviews where you phone people up, and I've done quite a few of those in my time because I'm on a roster. There's the focus groups, and of course there's newer mobile communities where basically the companies recruit about 300 or 400 people who are users of a certain brand, and they then ask them to various questions and have sort of contact with them over periods of time to do stuff. Less and less there's kind of things like standing around on street corners with clipboards, which is becoming, thankfully, very much out of fashion. Because it's not a very good way of doing it. But all of these rely on the assumption that people know what they're talking about and know what motivates their behaviour. So some of you may recognise Sussex University. This is where I was at for 15 odd years, I think it was. So way back when, I was working with a very clever professor, and they all have their own kind of like admin duties to do as well, on top of the kind of research they like to do. And he got the task that nobody wanted, which is to do the student admissions, because most universities get their money by getting the good students in, and they get funding for the good students they get the places for. So they need to fill all their places. But being a very clever psychologist and really rather a good statistician as well, he thought, okay, I'm going to find out what motivates people to come to Sussex University. And if I can do that, I can fill it really easily. It'll be a much simpler task and everybody will be happy and I'll have done my job. So he started asking people questions. He said, okay, you know, tell us about your A-levels, tell us about the grades that you got, tell us where you've come from, tell us what you're studying, you know, tell us the reasons why you came to Sussex. And he got all of the data after the first year and looked at it, and absolutely none of it was predictive of who took a place, because obviously had the data of who'd arrived. The only thing he noted was that some of the open days they ran were more successful than other open days. So he thought, okay, well, next year let's focus on those open days and let's see what we can find out from those. And so he looked at where they were going, what the information they were giving them, how they were running the days, how they were organizing, where they were taking them, who was speaking. And again, there was absolutely nothing that correlated with whether people would take a place or not. So depending, according to what people were telling him, it was pretty much random. So he thought about this, and the next year he kind of, same thing again, did the research, got no evidence at all, but he noted one thing, and he thought, it can't be that, surely. But then over the next 2 years, he tested it, and absolutely the one thing that predicted whether people came to Sussex was whether they arrived and it was sunny. If it rained, they didn't come. If it was sunny, they all came. And that sort of gives an example of how poor we are, even with these big life decisions. We are so poor at being able to actually try and report on the motivations of our behavior, because we just don't have the kind of access to it that we like to think we have. We like to think we have conscious access to everything in our minds, but we genuinely don't. And that's a really nice example. And there's another reason why we are not very good, is because we don't necessarily notice things. The sound on this is not too hot because I can't this way, but and of course apologies for video on Zoom because it might be a bit jerky, but hopefully you're going to be able to get enough of this to understand what's going on.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you? Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
There, so as you can see, even though we have we think we understand what's going on, quite often there's a huge amount going on in what we experience that we just don't notice. So again, that's another reason why we're really not very good at reporting on our own behavior. So the way I try and explain this to researchers is to say that the way the brain works, we'll come on to a bit more of that later, but the way the brain works is, it sort of relates to mindfulness, if you think about, if anybody who's done any of that. But basically, the brain is best designed to work in the now. We have a lot of these systems that absorb information, take on board stuff that we may not even be noticing, and then it processes it and kicks out these sensations of kind of familiarity, intuition that guide our behavior. But when you're researching, quite often what you're getting people to do is say, okay, tell me about something that's happened in the past. So try and consciously, mentally reconstruct some event in the past and then tell me about it. And we can do that to an extent, but we're not brilliant at it. I'll also show you in a minute. And quite often we do a very difficult thing for the brain to do, which is transport yourself into the future and then imagine something that you've never actually experienced and then try and report on that, which we are terrible at doing. So a little thought experiment for you on a Wednesday morning, thinking about the past. So we're now back into the world of vinyl again, which is rather marvelous. But I want you to think of all of the 10 favorite records that you've ever had. I mean, the ones that you've listened to hundreds of times, the sort of albums that you've listened to. Now I want you to think of all of the tracks on those albums, and I want you to list them in the correct order that they appear on that album. Try and do that in your own mind. And I won't leave you doing that too long because most people find that incredibly hard and they can't do it. I can't do it. But I guarantee that if you are listening to that album and one track finishes, you will know what the next one is. You'll know the starting lyrics, probably the starting instrumental bit, probably the starting few bars. You know, your brain just tells you this. And that's because the brain is designed to be a what happens next predictor. That's what it's designed to do. But it has to be immersed in a context to be able to do that. So that's what the brain does. And when we try and get to go into the future, I just use this because it was from a textbook I found in our charity shop from 1983, predicting what technology would be like today. And you can see it all relates to what's happening at that time. So their brains are kind of going, this is what's going to happen. You know, the massive mainframe in the front room, the kind of the wire and the hand thing, you know, and sort of push button food coming out of the walls. But what's more important is the stuff that's not there. There's no internet. There's no mobile phone. There's no tablet. All of the stuff that we read, there's no visual technology. There's none of the stuff that we actually know is the most influential stuff. And we're just rubbish at predicting. Even, I think there was a fantastic paper some years ago showing all of the predictions of experts. And they pretty much show that even expert predictions are very, very inaccurate. So the reason why is because, by the way, I may be disturbed by cats during this, so excuse me. So the reason why is because there's this model, the behavioural economics is something which is quite fashionable at the moment, but I've been doing it for nearly 30 years now. And the basic issue is that we like to think that this is that we have the metaphor is that we have system 2 and system 1. System 2 is where we can think, reason, cogitate, decide, understand, and then come up with a reasoned conclusion. And we like to think that we do that pretty much all the time with everything, but we don't. In fact, we have this system 1, which is a series of shortcuts. We take on board experience, our brain kicks out sensations, sometimes within a third of a second, to guide our behavior. And quite often these are the things that drive our behavior. You think back to the students, they went to lots of different universities. Sussex happened to be the one when it was sunny. They have this really nice positive feeling about Sussex, and that shortcut drove their behavior rather than any reasoned, thoughtful process. I mean, if I'm talking to arts people, which I think I am, some of the way to think about it is if you look at a good work of art, it would always work on 2 levels. The first level is there'll be a point that you get immediately, and then there'll be a second level where it tells you a story that you follows on from that you can follow afterwards. And that's sort of a nice metaphor as well for how it does. So I say the whole thing is around the brain is designed to predict what happens next. That's what the brain is designed to do. That's its primary job. Think about it like a cat swimming. Cats can swim, but really, really choose not to at all, if at all possible. In the same way with brains, brains can think, but actually try and avoid doing it as much as they can. So that's the sort of the reason, one of the reason behind it, the psychology behind the problems that we're trying to solve in the world of research. And we're doing this because vision is our dominant sense. So what this means is that a large proportion of the brain is taken up with visual processing, either vision in its own right, or hand-eye coordination, the eye-ear coordination, making everything make sense. There's lots of different parts of the brain that are involved in vision. So to prove that, again, this is the tricky video that may not work, but some of you may have seen this before. But again, this is demonstrating how, hopefully demonstrating how vision is our dominant sense.
Ba, ba, ba. Have a look at this. Ba, what do you hear? Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. But look what happens when we change the picture. Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. Ba. And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip, you are only ever hearing ba with a B. Ba, ba.
So again, that is an example where hopefully you got that illusion, if the video wasn't too jerky, that our brain sees the guy going rather than ba, and it rewrites what we hear to actually make it match what we see. So vision is, this is why, an example of why vision is our dominant sense. So knowing that, and this is why I got into visual technology, because visual technology has the ability to override everything. And if you're immersed in VR or you're seeing an AR object, what happens is you can take people from the past, take people into the future, and bring them into the now. And that's the basic idea behind what we're doing. So that is the thing that we've been working on very hard, the psychological bit that we're working on, to try and explain to people that it's not all about getting people to recall past events or looking at new events. So, how real is it? That's the question. Well, it's the one we always get asked, because people say, yeah, but it's not real life, it's not this, it's not that. It's like, well, fair enough, but we got to test this. So when we're going through life, we are experiencing dual realities all of the time. We're in one situation where something is taking us and transporting us somewhere else. So this can be reading a book, it can be watching a TV program, it can be going to the cinema. And there'll always be a level of the fact there's the one reality of us sitting in a cinema and say looking at us, you know, and the reality of people eating popcorn and slurping drinks around us. But there's another reality that's happening on the screen up there, and that second reality is one that we can get immersed into to a certain extent. So we got to test this with possibly the second oldest form of dual reality a couple of years ago, because we got to work with the Royal Shakespeare Company. This project was very interesting, because I got to go and see behind the scenes of the RSC, which I've never been to before. I've only been to the RSC before, but we got to go and film Titus Andronicus with a 360 video camera. Not one of Shakespeare's better plays, I can assure you. And we then had three groups of people. We had one group, this was done with Ipsos, we had one group of people who actually went and attended the performance itself. We had one group of people who went to the cinema broadcasts to increase accessibility. They broadcast these performances to cinema audiences, and you can go around the country. And we had a third group, which we ran in virtual reality. So we had the 360 camera, and they put the headset on and they watched the play that way. I mean, we mainly did it to try and see how tolerant people were to VR, because VR, it was considered, is 20 minutes was probably about as much as people could cope with. But we found that actually with breaks, I think the longest stint people did was an hour. But certainly with breaks, everybody did the 3 hours that we asked them to do, and it was a long schlep, and they were quite happy to do it. And then afterwards, they were asked questions, one of which was, did you feel like you were actually in the theatre? which we didn't ask people who went to the theatre, obviously, because if they didn't feel like they were in the theatre while they were in the theatre, we probably had recruited some wrong people. But we had the cinema group and we had the virtual reality group. The cinema group, 64% said, you know, there were moments at which I did feel like I was actually in the theatre, but these tended to coincide with moments where they shot it very cinematically. They had lots of tight shots where they were going into faces and getting reactions. That tended to be when they sort of said that's what it correlated with. But when it was with VR, it was up to 91%. So there's a lot greater than cinema, which is probably the most immersive. And there were some nice little stories as well that went along with that. The biggest complaint that we had was that people were watching in VR and then they looked down at their lap and suddenly realized they couldn't see the program, which is what they'd normally do when they went to the theatre to work out who was playing who. And there was another moment when a guy sort of kicked his shoes off and looked down and he physically jumped backwards because he couldn't see his feet. And VR is really good at tricking people into believing that they're somewhere and the reality is not. The reality they're experiencing in VR is actually reality. So we've used this, getting this onto this kind of brief of sort of what retailers are doing. We've used this with retailers over a number of years now. We've been doing it over lockdown. Most of the stuff we've done in lockdown, I can't say too much about because obviously it's client confidentiality data, but I'm going to try and give you a flavour by looking at some of the other things that we've done. So the first project we actually ever did was with O2. And O2 had an issue, which was they wanted to create some shopper marketing in store that allowed people to be able to understand what would work best, because they'd had a new product, this thing called O2 Home. It was something to do with controlling your home, heating everything from your mobile phone. And it wasn't doing too well, and they thought, well, it's probably the in-store promotion because that's the way the channel they'd chosen to use. It's probably not working. So they decided to test out some new creative executions. But of course, the problem is trying to do that in store would mean they'd have to create I want to look at 5 different things. They have to create 5 different points of sale, put them into a store over a period of time, and then get people in and research it. And then, you know, it's a very long-winded, very laborious task. So people can't do that terribly well. Not that they can do it, but it's just very expensive. So we were working with a research company, Populous, and they sort of would put this to us and said, okay, what we can do is, this is a 360 video of the store that we chose in Balham in London. You know, fine day filming O2 stores in Balham. That was one late February evening. And this in the middle is the fixture. So what we could do, and what we do, is we take the 360 video, we unwrap it, and then we CGI new fixtures in there so that they change. And so when people have the experience of VR experience, they are like, it's like looking in a store. So we chose the point at which they actually entered the store. And if you look at the video, these are 5 videos strung together, and you can see that that's the first one, that's the second one, that's the third one we used, that's the fourth one, and that's the last one. So all of these were CGI'd with different kind of combinations of image and of text, just to try and see which one worked best. And we then were able to integrate this into a survey. So Populous, they're one of these panels. They have hundreds of thousands of people. They can email them and say, hey, you can do X, Y, and Z, you know, come and do our survey, and they do. So what we did was we distributed Google Cardboards like this, very, you know, one piece of cardboard to them, and we sent them the link, and we said, okay, now put your phone, we taught them how to put the phone in the cardboard. They answered some questions on the mobile phone, put the phone into the Google Cardboard, had a look around at the store, and then answer questions at the back end. This is kind of like almost like our first ever proto pilot for how to do this. and I think we were the first ever. So we obviously used different videos. So I had 5 different cells of people who were looking at different stores, and then we were asking them about what they saw. So the first data we got back showed us that actually in terms of recall, things like Samsung and O2 Priority were getting more attention. O2 Home was getting less attention than those, but it was getting more than some of the others. But yeah, we kind of concluded, but we could work out from the 5 different films which was working best and which wasn't, and diagnosing why there was a problem. And actually, weirdly, because for some bizarre reason they decided to advertise this with a Vive headset, and a VR headset, so you could put a Vive headset on and then look around. And of course, people just looked at it and thought it was a product which involved VR, and it wasn't. It was VR to explain something. It was actually a very bad use of VR. So we used VR to prove that VR wasn't a good channel to communicate in this case. So, but yeah, it's moved forward, and they've actually made, so we did it with 380 people, which is the first time, you know, you couldn't get 380 people into a store. And to research this, it was the first time this had ever been done, and it won a couple of awards. But yeah, it was kind of like our prototype for working out how to do this stuff. What we've done since is, and this is now up for an award this year, is we've been able to work with people like Mondelez, Cadbury, for those of you who are not au fait with who big conglomerates are, and we're able to create heat maps now from mobile phones and pieces of cardboard, which is pretty cool. So this will give us attention, and there's things that we can do, like we can work out how people are moving around the space. So if any of you have ever been involved in eye tracking is where you've got a set of glasses, probably naturally not much bigger than my own glasses at the moment, and it measures the eye and it measures the thing in front of you, and you can see where the eye's moving around, and that's really accurate. This is using head tracking. It's not as accurate, but there's certainly plenty that you can do with it. So we've been able to do this with shelf displays. So this mainly goes to the thing that we talked about, my brief, which was to talk about retailers in lockdown. So in lockdown, obviously, you can't really do research in store. So we've been able to go, because we can get access to stores after hours, which is much more convenient for the retailers. We can take these films. In this case, we just messed around with the shelf actually in store, but we also CGI elements into the stores. So we completed jobs over, I think the last one we did was in Korea, where we were looking at a display, and they were looking at various elements around the till fixture, where you pay, and what communications, what advertising was working best and what was working least best. And let me tell you, I'm never going to live in Korea, because they managed to produce the most cluttered, visually cluttered shops I've ever seen in my life. It is extraordinary how much they want to cram in there. I think it's a cultural thing, but it's visually incredibly noisy. Anyway, so we're able to create things, and we're able to show how long people are engaged with, how long people are. So for engagement, I can't give you the details, but we divided in this case, the shelf up into different areas. And I can't tell you what it was doing, or what it was meant to be doing, or how we were doing it, or what the project was about. But we were looking at how much people moved around the different sections that we'd divided up. And we could see that obviously the grey line showed that people were significantly moving around more for that. So we took that as an indication that people were finding it much harder to find something. So it's much more difficult to be able to look around that. So that was more visually tricky for them. But with the kind of shopper marketing stuff, so for example, going back to our O2, had we had this technology then, we'd be able to see how much time people were orientated towards a fixture, how much time they were spending, how long, did they move away, did they come back again, that kind of thing. So all of these are going to be better indications, and these are the kind of things that we've been able to use now we've got that technology in lockdown. So we've run these with, I mean, well, a bit of unexpected animation there. We've run these internationally with up to 800 people looking at news play. But the great thing about this is that we can do this even without the assets existing. So if people want to test some new displays, some new shelf setups, some new shopper marketing, all that kind of stuff, we're able to do that with like a camera in store and then using CGI. And it's cheaper, it's faster, it's quicker, and we can get behavioural data out of it now to show. I mean, literally, and it's just using a piece of cardboard, which is quite nice. So the other interesting thing about using VR in this kind of research is people find it really interesting. So on the standard film stuff, as you can see, you know, like sort of people find it, yeah, it's okay, they enjoy it. But when you put them in VR, they really love it. And one of the great trials of trying to do online research is to keep it interesting for people. And people just tend not to like it. And you know, they get bored after a while of seeing the same thing. But this they really loved. So again, that's another thing that we've been able to show that people engage with it and can do it. I mean, one of our great boasts is that we've had respondents up to the age of 90 completing. So it's not just a young techie thing, anybody can do it. And we've made it intuitive so that we can fit this stuff into an online survey. We can, you know, I won't tell you the boring tech of it, but we're able to sort of work out who it is, take their information, save the behavioural information, and then pass it back to the client to say, this is what's going on. This is sort of a slight diversion away from retail, but it's a good project to talk about, and it talks about, you know, but it gives you an idea again of sort of thinking that's going on in these sort of industries. We work with, you know, national, internationally, and we've been doing a lot of work with Kinetic, who are WPP's out-of-home agency, and trying to show how they can better use the adverts that you see on the sides of buses, posters in the street, billboards. So. And the question that they, again, this is using the technology to answer a question that they've never been able to answer before, which is how often can you see an ad, or should you see an ad? You think it's one of these things that would be very easy to find out, but actually, of course, if you try and do it one way by trying to track people, cat's disturbance again, I do apologise. Come here. Anyway, but yeah, apologies. But yes, so you can try and track people, but of course you wouldn't be sure if they actually saw an ad or not. And secondly, if you try and do it by just using forced exposure, by showing it onto a screen, again, the problem is that it's not natural, it's not realistic. Because when you're if you show something on a screen, it's like, okay, but you never know with all the noise and stuff that's going on around outside, whether that's actually going to grab attention. So that's what I just said. So we were able to do this with the same principle that we use for O2. We took the camera out into the street. This is actually a shopping centre in Bristol, and again, that ad there for Barocca had only ever been released in America, had never been released in the UK, but we were able to create these VR experiences where you can see it's moving a bit jerky, but it's moving around, and that ad is realistic, and it's the, you know, what you would, as you would experience. So again, we put this into VR, and that's interesting. There we go. Again, we put this into VR. The same process as before. People get recruited, they get sent a headset, cardboard headset. They then are invited to take part in the survey. They take part in the survey. They then, at the appropriate point, pop their phone into the headset. They have a look around, and then we ask them questions. In this case, because we were looking at numbers of responses, people looked between 2 and 16 responses over about a period of about a week. So we wanted as well to try and make it as accurate as possible, to try and get an equivalent sort of time frame that people would experience these ads. So we sent them invites, up to 4 different invites to see these ads. We were using something called the principle called the mere exposure effect. Again, my background in psychology came to the fore. This is let's all get technical. This is called the hedonic fluency model, which we used of mirror exposure effect. Basically, the mirror exposure effect is where the more you see something, the more you like it. And then at the point at which you sort of seen it enough, that drops away and you like it less. And they say the hedonic fluency model is the best explanation, because that says, okay, as you see something new, you are emotionally drawn to it to learn as much about it as you possibly can. Then you reach a point at which you've sort of learnt enough for you not to have to bother with it anymore. And then it goes down again as you sort of become less interested. And it's kind of a fundamental principle in pretty much everything. All life has this. I did my PhD in this, partially in this topic, and 1991 paper guy called Francini proved that you can get this effect with chickens. So it is fundamental across all of kind of nature. This is what happens. And so, of course, it worked really nicely for trying to understand advertising, because if you look at the number of emotional responses and then you keep this peak point, obviously you want to see there, because that's the ultimate exposure. That's what you want to get to before, because if you start putting ads out when you're down on the, I'm pointing, why am I pointing? You can't see me pointing at something. But when you're further up, when you're past the curve, at the bottom end of the curve, obviously you've got too many, you're being less effective. So I managed to talk a fantastic lady called Jenny into letting me do this, and we did. And her reward was the fact that we got this precise curve, which looked very much like the mirror exposure effect curve, and she was astonished and delighted, as I was, I have to say, to show that you get this. So again, this, you know, it does work, and we got this effect. And they thought that the number of exposures, it was a maximum of around about 7, but we were able to show it was much higher than that. And so the biggest media planning agency for outdoor media has changed their planning strategy based on this research, which is quite a compliment. That's the best compliment you can get when there's a researcher and some actions taken on the thing that you found out. So again, slightly further away from retail, but it's again another example of what can be used. I mean, we're still scratching the surface with VR and AR at the moment, because there's a lot that can be done. But we're just at the point of completing. I was saying to the guys beforehand, I did a presentation last week and the technology failed. So hopefully we're all on track at the moment. But yeah, last week, but I gave this one last week, so I can talk about it. Because the other thing about VR is an empathy machine. If you're into VR, you may recognize this image from a project about VR and empathy. So that again interested me, and I got talking to an old mate of mine who I used to commute with, who I just knew as ITV Neil. And then before I found out about after 2 years of having fun with him on the train, that he was the head of research, which is quite handy as I'm a researcher. So anyway, we've known each other for a long time, but we were talking about what we could possibly do with this new technology. And this is the pilot study we did about a year ago. And we wanted to see if it could induce empathy in ITV audiences so that audiences could better understand. We could use this empathy thing to better understand the audiences. So we set ourselves 3 tasks. We wanted to see if people who don't like an ITV program can be made to empathise with people who do. And if they do empathise, would it lead to a re-evaluation of how it was perceived? And if that was the case, could we generate understanding of how to communicate the benefits of a program to people who maybe not like it? And would VR bring ITV closer to its audience with a side issue? I mean, I put this one in to discuss today because it talks about empathy, but I think also if you're a commercial organisation, you need to also be able to understand your audience. And this is a principle that we've demonstrated with ITV, and we're going on to demonstrate it with other people as well. Even though TV is a very obvious one, all companies need to understand their consumers and who they work with and who they depend on. And I think that is something which this model applies to all of this. So what do we do? Well, again, we took a 360 video camera, we put it in people's homes this time. And we got people to watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and Dancing on Ice. And these were fans of the show. They watched them every week. They enjoyed it. We recruited them on the basis that they liked the shows. Again, note that we've CGI'd the actual programs into the scene, because otherwise in VR, you tend to sort of be playing head tennis like this with kind of the TV and where they're sitting. We then recruited some groups of people, standard focusy group type stuff, but we used a device called, hello, there we go. We used a device called, this is, it's playing very slowly, never mind. This is a VR qualitative tool, because I got fed up many years ago of having, if you do kind of qualitative workshops with people, you end up carrying bags and bags of magazines and pens and paper for them to cut up and do whatever with. So I created this, or rather commissioned the creation of this thing called Creative Space. It's a VR qualitative tool. You have one wall which is like language, one wall which is an emotion wall, and this is based on Ekman and Plutchnik's emotional hierarchy, and there's another metaphor wall. But effectively you go into a room with a Vive in a handset and you're creating digital mood boards. That's what you're doing. And it's a nice, neat little way of doing it, and a computer and a headset's much easier to carry than 30 magazines and scissors and stuff and glue. Just genuinely what people still do. So we recruited these people to tell us about, use this device to tell us about their relationship with these programs. And lo and behold, because we recruited people who didn't like the programs, they told us Dancing on Ice was boring, like porridge, it's samey, it's dull, it's not even, it's beige, it's yawn, yawn. They didn't like it, so we recruited the right people. And the same was true of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. People particularly didn't like Clarkson, which is not unsurprising. It's long, it can be tuned in, it drags out, yada yada. So we recruited the people correctly. But we then did this extra thing and said, okay, what we're going to do now is we've got these videos of people watching the programs who enjoy it. And we had two 15-minute videos of like Dancing on Ice and Millionaire. And we said, you know, hey, why don't you sit in these headsets and just sit with people. So the idea was to create a sense of presence, of being in the room with people who were enjoying the program. And if we could do that, would that then affect the way that they were understanding? Would they get any sense of empathy with the people who they were watching, in effect, virtually with? And of course, the first thing that happens when you do, everybody has a nice look around somebody else's house. That's the first thing that happens when you put people in VR in other people's homes. They love that. But we know, after watching with fans, how did the people feel about the programs was the question we really wanted to find out. But so firstly, it was whether it was, you know, did they feel any empathy? And I think my favourite quote was a bluff northern bloke who said, I felt, oh, they felt. And he genuinely said that. But, you know, I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to chip in and say something. I wanted to be more personal of understanding. You wouldn't have seen this positive unless you sat with them. You know, gives you a guy even got philosophical saying, it gives you a warm feeling. It makes me sad that we don't more of this as a family. It's the simple things that you miss out on. And they got it. They definitely got being there, and they wanted to be part of it. So there did seem to be something going on. And more interestingly, it actually led to a complete reevaluation of the programs. It's about togetherness. It's about being social. It's about, you know, it brought them together. You can see it's a family-orientated program. It's a family team effort, etc. For Millionaire, because they were all answering the questions together, and Dancing on Ice, you know, they were bonding, they were having a laugh, you know, they were talking about it together, they were brought together through interaction. It was drawing them in, you know, and it was a great shared experience. So again, this did lead to an evaluation, which is right, you know, which I think we were sort of, we might get something, but it really was a very dramatic change. I say this was just a pilot, and we've since gone on to do work. This is what I'm finishing delivering at the moment, because I mean it's been knocked out of kilter by lockdown, sadly. But we've delivered, I think we recorded 64 homes between around about this time last year, and we actually filmed the last one on the day that Boris Johnson announced lockdown. And we have a fantastic film of somebody who's become known around ITV as Coronavirus Catherine. And because as I don't know you people, I won't use the precise words that she was using, but I will replace one word with another, and she just spent about 5 minutes during the Boris Johnson talk shouting, "Stay the duck at home." Stay ducking home, etc. And it just went on, and it's absolutely brilliant, because it's amazing. You put these things in people's homes, people, you kind of forget that you can't stop being yourself. You kind of forget that you're there. Anyway, but this kind of social bonding thing that we noted, and this is what we went on to go and study in this the big piece, that respondents did report that they empathised, and we've seen this again, and we've quantified this, and it's true. They understood that the event was kind of an occasion that the TV was there not to, wasn't there to sort of be a program in its own right, and that's how they were evaluating it, but the TV's job was really to be there as a part of a bonding exercise for the family to bond around. And this actually fits with something called social identity theory by a guy called Teifel and Vygotsky, are the two main protagonists, and they basically say that we sort of see we see ourselves as part of a social group. You see yourselves as part of a social group, and you will make an effort to reinforce the bonds with that group, through positive interactions as often as you can. It's just what people do. We all do it. We all go down the pub. Well, we don't anymore, but when we were being social, it's what we do. And because of this, because we put people in this situation with VR, they had empathised, and they had empathised with the groups, and they wanted to be part of these groups. And because of this, they shifted their attitude towards the programmes. And again, we did this with the Johnson-Corbyn debate again last December. And again, we saw the same effect with that. And again, this was kind of, we were interested in evaluating programs rather than evaluating the content of what the politicians themselves. But it was a way of getting people to think about looking at the content only and looking at other people from a broad spectrum of political views, watching Corbyn and Johnson, and therefore sort of negating their own political bias. One of the problems with VR, as you know, I've just ripped this from the talk I did last week, not so relevant, but we've just created an app for them. So there are things like Oculus Go. The problem with VR is it's very personal. We've created an app for ITV where we can do group viewing, but of course we can't because it's COVID, so we can't do that yet. But the conclusions were that this is from the recent study that we did, because that's about 1.5 years old, that we did find that we got this empathy effect. It did lead to re-evaluation that fitted with social identity theory, and ITV are really happy because they're able to actually sit in a room with their audience and understand them. These two, I don't know if any of you, probably none of you follow Coronation Street. I know I don't. But last year there was a storyline where Sinead was a young mum of like 23, 24, and she'd got cervical cancer and she died. And it was very sort of poignant as to this work progressed over the weeks. And these two guys were possibly the best people we filmed, because they, very sadly, they'd been to a funeral the day before, and they were of course watching this very emotive scene in TV about this poor lady's demise, and they were just in bits, and they were just so amazing how open people were, with their lives. And they would, I just wanted to hug them afterwards, except they were in Manchester and I couldn't anyway. So anyway, so that's kind of VR. So we've talked a lot about VR, mainly because that's the stuff I can talk about. But we know that it's about, but you always need specialist kits. So one of the problems we have using VR is, we have to get people to download apps and get these for quant surveys, and that's a problem. And of course, the new Quest is a revelation. I've got to get one. I've got to order one. I must order one today. But you need specialist kit, and it's coming. It will happen, and these things will become more common. And we still kind of think of these things as being like Michael Greco in Wall Street with a massive brick phone, and we've now got nice little iPhones. But our focus is probably more going to be on augmented reality, because all the predictions are that augmented reality is going to have much more of an impact on our day-to-day lives. This is the stuff, again, that we've been working on, but I really can't talk about much of it. Whereas I've got some examples with VR that I can talk about. With the AR, it's pretty much all under embargo. But suffice it to say, we've worked with multinationals in the States creating things, and I can show you, this is our own video, but this is the kind of augmented reality. There's a coffee machine that we've got, and there's another one, and this is the kind of thing where we are able to show that these objects exist in the real world. And this is the kind of stuff that we're doing with people in the States and various places to get them to understand what new objects look like. I say, none of those exist. It's all augmented reality, and that's my kitchen. But one of the big questions that came up in my mind, again, I'm a nerdy psychologist, and I have to do this, is that I did a lit review several years ago and found that if you type in psychology and virtual reality, you get about 3,000 hits. If you type in psychology and augmented reality to a sort of academic research engine, you get 3 hits. And those who looked at mobile-based AR, none. So I kind of thought this needed to be addressed. And even though I'm a humble practitioner rather than an academic, I never need to describe myself as a lapsed or reformed academic. I'm somewhere in between. This needs to be sorted. So anybody who has done anything with AR may know about Mel Slater, who's the best known cognitive scientist working in VR. And the Slater also Steed questionnaire is the one from 20 years ago that's standardly used to understand how much of a sense of presence things create, VR experiences create. So it made sense to me to say, okay, well, if you can do that for the VR, surely you can adapt it for AR. So I took the standard questionnaire and created it, saying, okay, well, rather than saying a sense of being in the virtual environment, sense of the object being in the room with you. To what extent was the environment real, to what extent was the object real? And you could just translate it from kind of, places that you're immersed in to objects. And again, with Ipsos, we did a study where we had 2 cells. One set of people looked at a flat image of a tin of beans. I do like to use exciting stimulus. And the other one looked at a virtual representation of an augmented reality tin of beans. And again, they answered those questions afterwards, how real did it feel, was it, etc. And it was a slightly skewed sample because we actually got people to do it in kind of an office environment rather than a sort of a retail environment. But again, this sort of shows you the kinds of things that we've sort of been doing in lockdown. But interestingly, we showed that it's about 2.5, 3 times more sense of presence with augmented reality than with an image. And when you look at the individual questions, being in the room with you and being here or not here, as the 2 phrases are used, those were the things that were the most important and that had the most significant effect. So it fits very well with we've been able to go talk to people and talk to clients and say, hey guys, you can look at this. You can look at this kind of augmented reality and it will improve your ability to actually get people to feel things exist. And this was a static object. This wasn't, so those coffee machines I showed you, they're animated, they move around, they have stuff that works. You can tap things, but that's just the basic things themselves. And so all of this says, okay, well, AR does make things feel like they are real and they are kind of, they are happening. So that's kind of important for us to know and important from a research perspective because it gives people a better feeling of what's going on. And so the exciting thing for us with this is that talking to companies and the way they develop new products takes probably about 6 iterations before they actually get to make something and put it in somebody's hand and say, this is a thing that exists. And it's always a big ask to get organizations to change the way they do stuff, but we can we can create these for a fraction of the cost. Some of the other things that we've done with augmented reality, so we've done new product concepts with Coca-Cola. That was really interesting. That tended to be more how they were communicating within the business about it. We were able to do car clinics, which is a big thing in research, by using augmented reality to match up kind of new bits of the car. So somebody could go and look at the car that they had, the new one that they had, and then they could change things on it by pointing a tablet out and tapping stuff. We've again also been able to do things with the pharma sector and looking at kind of new things and new patient journeys and how they go through new objects, and evaluating products as well, the idea of the consumers. And again, this is another little film, and it's because it all creates a sense of presence. And I hope this plays okay. This was one of our respondents a little while ago.
Maybe just zoom in a tiny bit to look at the can. Actually move your left hand in.
Oh, sorry. Oh!
Yeah.
Where's the can? I'm dead confused.
Yeah, it's augmented. It's not a real can, it's in the fan. Yes, that's good for us.
That was really, I had no idea.
Yeah. So that was an example. Whereas you get it much more with VR, you can actually get people who get confused and think augmented reality things are actually real. And so this is this sense of presence that we do. So this is what we've been doing. We've been taking online surveys and being able, people testing new products, because obviously, in times of lockdown, it's very hard to, people are less willing to have things delivered to them. They can't take them out into the store. They can't use them, but you can use augmented reality to do all of this stuff. And we have this kind of platform where you can integrate it into online, so people can get this sense of presence of being somewhere or seeing a thing online. That works really nicely. And there's lots of challenges that we've been looking at in consumer research, which is like sort of AR product concepts, like, pack tests, as I've said. We've got a new design of a pack. We can use shopper diaries too. With the VR stuff, again, it's sort of, you can put people in a situation, they can look around a store, you can look at the kind of shopper marketing stuff they've got. And with the consumer decisions is quite interesting, because we did this, one of the early projects that we did. We got people to, again, an example of the sense of presence, we got people to, it was with a research company, and they interviewed people who just bought a car. And they said, okay, what was good and what was bad about the car buying experience? And so they said, here's the good bits, here's the bad bits. We went, okay. So we created a script of a car salesman doing the bad things and a car salesman doing the good things. And that's an actor called Ross that you may recognize from the Tesco advert Christmas last year, a mate of mine. And he was so he did the good guy and the bad guy. And people were then shown this in VR and talked about research, people who were going to be car buyers. And they hated the bad guy, obviously, and they also hated the good guy, because if they were in that situation where they were having a salesman talking to them in a sort of car showroom, they started to feel under pressure. They started to feel like they were being pressured to do something. They didn't like it very much. And whereas before, even though he was doing all the things people had said were the stuff that they liked, actually they didn't like it at all. Anyway, so looking forward to the new futures. Well, who knows what's happening with retail at the moment? It's a bit of a minefield. I went to a conference last year called Retail Recharged, and in all honesty, they were struggling. The retail sector, from the conference, the discussions were around how retail was struggling back then. So I can't think how lockdown has hit many parts of this sector. But this is one potential thought, that this is a CGI. All of this is CGI. We create CGI stores as well, full of stuff, and you can interact with it and pick it up. And we did this as kind of because sometimes it was hard to get access to stores, so we had somewhere to put some of the things we wanted to create displays, and it works really nicely. It's got gravity. It's got everything you want. But I'm starting to wonder whether this might, with VR, this might actually end up what retail could potentially look like in the future. Who knows? And with augmented reality, of course, again, that is a huge area that's going to happen. And we've already seen kind of engineering firms. I mean, there was a great example of Microsoft HoloLens being used with aircraft design or aircraft engineering, where you're literally being sort of talked through what to put where as you're building this aeroplane by the HoloLens. It's really interesting, but there's lots that can be done. Of course, that's a very poor representation, because if you actually had that in VR, it'd be like looking through it like that rather than the whole thing itself. But you get the idea. But all of this, as I say, as a researcher, the whole that I've got into this is that basically you do this because you can't. Researching in the past isn't very good. Researching in the future is terrible, but it's getting people into the now that's the important thing. And that's what all of this does. So as a researcher's point of view, it's a really brilliant tool to be able to show and prompt people and get them to behave in the way that you want to, and find out how accurately people are going to behave in the future. I think that's me done. I've nearly done the whole hour. Blimey, I thought I was going to struggle. Right, I better put my headphones in. so I can hear you.
I could engage with that for many, many more hours, Ali. What a fascinating trip. Honestly, absolutely gripped here. Really fascinating. Thank you very much. So we've got a little bit of time for just some discussion really about that. There's a few questions that have come in on the chat, so we'll probably go straight over to those. I know I've got a few things I'd like to ask as well, but I'll come to that in a bit. Andreas, you raised some really interesting questions there. Are you all right for me to bring you in so that you can ask Ali directly?
Yeah, sure. So I was listening to the background while working, so I might have missed the point. And I don't think I want to become like against new technology or VR or stuff like this. But I've been working user experience for the last 10 years. And one thing that we all the time wonder is like the impact of technology on human beings. And now we have enough evidence of the impact of phones that they had on us and social media. There is all this discussion in media. So what would be really interesting is like some of the simulation that you show are really like kind of astonishing. I think the technology is really advanced. But what I have now is like I am in a retailer experience. In my house, I can simulate the object. It feels like I have it, but then the experience just disappear. Because you were tapping in quite a lot on psychology, is almost this desire of having material things around me, experiencing them in my context, but then not being able to have them, for example, or not being able to control my buying impulse. But there was quite a lot of how company will benefit from VR in eye tracking data and understanding better how consumers interact with them. But if we look on more on a service design approach from a retailer experience, there is also the other side of the coin. Is like, how are we going to protect consumers? How are we going to make sure that actually consumers still happy and not everything will disappear because people just get depressed? Does it make sense? It's a big, quite open question, I think, but maybe you can answer.
I'm not quite sure. Okay, can you make it a shorter question?
Okay, it's like, how can we make sure that we add in a positive experience for the consumers and not only for the seller, in saying that as a consumer, I'm now able to see, let's say, a Ferrari in my garage, but then I'm not able to purchase it. I'm not able to.
Okay, right. Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought you were saying. So from my
brain, I'm excited, but then everything switch off.
Okay. So from my perspective, I'm only in research. So my objective is to be able to give people as an honest an experience of something that doesn't exist yet, so that we can predict whether it's good or bad. So, for example, if you're working with a, so I could talk about, so inhalers, for example. There are inhalers that, you know, you can give people an example of how the technology or how the thing itself works. So if you're a research company, quite often you get these little bits of plastic that have taken about 30,000 pounds to produce, and they are treated, you know, with absolute kind of respect and love, and, you know, because they're really expensive. And AR is just a way of creating that. So in terms of actually delivering a final product to somebody, I don't think it's a question that relates to what I'm doing, because all I'm doing is giving people an experience of what a product will be like and deciding and predicting whether they think it will be a good or bad thing. So it's not a question of having a thing and then it vanishing out of their lives. It's a thing of having it and then seeing, would having it in their lives be a useful thing to have?
Okay, and who will be the specialist to look into, like, if I have to ask this question, which kind of professional figure do you see at the moment in the VR industry that would be able to answer?
Probably somebody doing VR and the philosophy of morality, I would have thought. But I'm just a humble cognitive scientist.
Okay.
An ethics.
Ethics is the word I was looking for. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, but then again, I mean, if you look at VR and mental health, I mean, it's exposure, and exposure effect is the big important thing. And that's so putting people in situations, environments, and something, you know, taking them to places is you know, that's a benefit in that case. It's not about having something and taking it away. It's that transportation to somewhere else can be a huge benefit. Anyway.
Yeah, I do absolutely agree with what you're saying. And I think everything comes with two sides of the coins. So there is the absolutely benefits, also like having, I don't know, virtual reality and gaming, or virtual reality in the army to recovery and stuff like this. Then there is also the other side of it. And what is interesting for me, the new media is like almost combine the two sides and not working on silos, to try to see actually with so many experts in the fields, how can we make sure so that we're not replicating the same mistake again and again with technology. But as you're saying, I think you're in a different field. So my question is not absolutely relevant to you. But it was a fascinating talk. Thank you for your sharing.
Pleasure.
Ushi, you had some questions or observations about Google Glass and other hardware? You're on mute. So.
Great adminning there. Yeah, I just, when we were moving on to the AR part, and I was thinking about Google Glass and how it was being heralded as you know, this great thing that everybody would have, and I was just wondering what went wrong with that, whether it was to do with the hardware or whether people weren't ready for AR. And maybe phones, having that on your phone, now people are more used to smartphones, has that helped to get people?
I can posit a theory on this, and it's not a technology theory, it's a psychological theory. I think one of the biggest mistakes that Google made was the way it looked. I mean, the functionality wasn't fantastic, but again, going back to my research life, I'll tell you a little story from about 12, 13, 14 years ago. I worked with a organization called Changing Faces, who support people who have a facial disfigurement. And they, through that, we did this thing called an implicit attitude test, because they knew that having a facial disfigurement meant that people were they were discriminated against, simply. But nobody would ever admit that they were discriminated against people with a facial disfigurement. So they could always have this perennial problem. But using this implicit attitude test, I was able to show that people were massively biased against those with a facial disfigurement. And through that, I understood why we have that. It's because what we consider as attractive is actually the most average faces. And that's average in terms of eye, nose, mouth proportion and symmetry. And I think that was one of the key issues with Google Glass, is it wasn't symmetrical. You put it on and it was over one eye, and you were walking around looking like a Borg from Next Generation. And I think that's what, you know, and if you're sitting in a kind of in-group in California, in San Francisco, wandering around Google's, wherever it is, I don't know where their headquarters is now, but, you know, doing that, and everybody's wearing one, it's all cool and fun. But if you're actually in the street, you look like a plonker. I think that was part of the problem. But, you know, we're still waiting for Apple to produce their Apple Glass, because that's going to be a next big game changer. But, you know, a pair of glasses that's not going to look too dissimilar to this slave to a phone driving it. So I think once glasses start to look like glasses and you don't know people are wearing them, then that's probably when they're going to be, with those wearables are going to be most important, or take off best.
Thanks.
Olga, if we can bring you in, has a question about the sort of wider uses of this. I mean, I was going to ask a similar question. Obviously, this is consumer research, presumably because the big corporates have the money to fund this at the moment. But is this also being used in service design? You know, potentially there's the democracy research, understanding people's voting intentions, things like that. I mean, Olga, feel free to come in if you want to expand on your question as well.
Hi, no, but actually that was it. I was just wondering because like what is the use case for service design? Because I just briefly thought that it might be also some opportunities to build some scenarios with like check-in experience, like, I don't know, in airport where you can use it simulation instead of like building actual decorations, etc.
Yes, in terms of researching environments, absolutely. So you can create, we've had the problem with creating 6 DOF environments is they're very expensive, and people get terribly excited about it and then suddenly realize they've got to find a much bigger budget that they thought they were ever going to, and it doesn't happen. So we've always kind of stuck to 3 DOF mobile because that's what people tend to afford. In terms of service, there's some interesting thoughts there as well, because what we have done, and I mean, more interestingly, the area that is of most interest to business is what goes on in the doctor's consultancy room, because people are not able to really kind of research that very accurately. And that's in terms of what the doctor says as well as what the patient says. But what we can do is create short films and then have a sort of like a tree of decision making. So the film happens, then we have, do you say A or B? Then make a choice, then a second film happens, A or B, etc. And it's sort of nested. So absolutely you can do so. So in effect, that example I talked about at the end with the car showroom was a service experience. So yes, it can be done. And that was just a guy doing a monologue, but you can make that more interactive. It's never going to be as good as actually sending somebody into research, but the advantage is that you can do it with thousands of people fairly instantly rather than having to do it qualitatively over a long period of time. So yeah, it can be done.
Yeah, cool. And I think around user experience research, probably, is it something you also had had opportunity to explore?
User experience in terms of
like digital products research. So
we tend to work not digitally. We only tend to work with, so we're dedicated towards applying VR and AR to the vertical of market research. That's what we do. So I know the user experience UX does come into that a bit, but we've sort of avoided that really, because I think and there's specialist companies that do that and it's mostly for gaming, and we're not really in gaming. We're sort of more in kind of trying to change the attitude of business into doing something different.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
The example you gave of ITV, obviously using it as a tool to see how they turn an initial negative reaction to a TV program into something potentially more positive. So there's a little bit of nudge stimulus sort of
in that case it was more like a shove, but yeah.
Sort of again, are there going to be wider applications in broader civic society? I mean, right this minute the government's got a huge challenge on its hand in order to try and cut through with some very sort of complex behavioural demands of the British public, of whom many are wholesale responding to, sometimes slightly too much, and others are not at all. Could they use something like this in terms of working with a sample of people who are rule breakers and rule takers to find out how to manage or nudge people into certain behaviours, and are there dangers in how far that can go? I know that's a bit more of an ethics question.
No, that is a very much an ethical question, because the only way I could think it is you could create a 360, take a 360 camera, put it into a ward and watch a COVID ward and watch what's going on, and then show it to people who won't wear a mask and say, guys, but the ethics of that are questionable.
But from a data researcher perspective, or from an attitudes researcher perspective, do you see that stuff as the technology and the applications of it becomes more affordable? Do you see that becoming a more mainstream part of the way kind of behaviour is measured?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're doing. So that the whole deal was that we're a tech company, not a research company. But I do loads of research because nobody's doing it. Nobody's really demonstrating how to use this technology in an effective way, and I've sort of taken on the mantle myself to do that. So yeah, I'm sure there are. I'm sure, given a brief and given ideas, there's many ways that we could understand and think about how to create, use this technology to better understand how to get compliance. I can't off the top of my, I can't necessarily do it off the top of my head and come up with a design, but yeah, I think there's lots that could potentially be done to, I mean, certainly in terms of understanding of communications, which is one of my specialities. Yep, there's ways that we can do that, certainly.
Thank you. I'm aware Donna has to leave very shortly, but she did have a question about different characteristics response to this. Donna, have you got time to ask it before you need to leave?
I think she's gone.
Oh, she's gone. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll ask it on her behalf then, and she can catch up with the recording.
Yeah.
But so are there any significant differences in engagement with different characteristics at age, gender, income, location? Presumably there'll be some people who just find this entire process completely alien, and therefore maybe the data is not so reliable, or do you find that that's not the case?
No, we've never had a problem. We've done it with as I say, we've done the VR Google Cardboard online stuff with people from 16 to 90, and we've never had an issue. And you know, people just engage with it and they get it, and we don't have a problem. So we've not had that problem, no. And in terms of characteristics, I'm sure there are characteristics there, but I'm a cognitive scientist, so I'm more interested in the hardware of what the brain does rather than the sort of software of the personality differences. So,
and are there any cognitive differences between you know, different characteristics that may affect the way that people perceive some of this? I mean, I don't know that much.
No, clearly there are, because I'm one of these people who, if I go onto one of those roller coaster things, I fall over. Because I'm hardwired that I cannot, and if the VR virtual environment is moving and I'm not, it makes me feel really very, very sick indeed. But some people can, you know. So there's clearly some hardwiring difference there, but what that is, I've no idea, and I'm not sure it's ever been researched.
Would anybody else who hasn't asked a question like to ask one? You'd be very welcome to do so now, or even if you have before, you can ask another one.
Can I just ask about the name Gorilla in the Room? Is that based on
Yes.
so like the clip you showed earlier, and people
inattentive
noticing
blindness.
changes in the background?
Yeah, inattentive blindness. Yeah, that's because that was an ad by Transport for London, and I was involved in the first one they did, which was the classic gorilla one that they showed. And they did that, and they got in a bit of trouble for it from the guy who invented it. But yeah, so.
And you know, very briefly at the end there, you gave a glimpse of the potential shopping future. I find that really exciting because
me too. It'll be
at the best of times, let alone now. And I imagine the world's attitude towards you know, kind of physical shopping is going through some very strange ups and downs. How much do you think that research into that is going to be accelerated, given where we're at?
It's not going to be accelerated that much, is the honest answer, because it will happen, but it's the old tanker analogy that these big organizations, they have got their methods of working and they were going to keep working on them. And you know, you try and get them to do something new. Nobody ever gets sacked for hiring IBM. Nobody ever gets sacked for doing the same old thing. And people do get sacked for doing something new and wacky. And so they're very, 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 research is incredibly conservative. And they, you know, we've been working with a major international research company who took us on as the AR/VR roster. And we've done so little work with them because they just want to sell direct questions, because that's what their business is. So hence the reason why our strategy is that I go out and I do all these big things like with ITV and go, look, this is what you can do with it. And they suddenly go, oh, we could have done that. And then, so yeah, it'll happen, but it's going to take a couple of years for the big organizations to really understand how to adopt this technology in terms of research.
That's interesting, because I would imagine this is from an entirely novice perspective, you know, that some of the kind of 100% online retailers that have had a very, very good 6 months and have probably amassed quite a big war chest for this stuff. You know, your Amazons and your Asoses could be all over this. You know?
Yeah, I'm sure they are, but we tend to not work with the retailers. We tend to work with the companies and brands direct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last chance for anyone else who wants to ask Ali a question about only that. I mean, there was so much there. Otherwise, then I'm going to say a huge thank you to Dr. Alastair Goode for your presentation. That was great.
Pleasure.
Really fun.
Absolute
really,
pleasure.
Really clear, and yeah, lots of food for thought. I'm going to just bring my slides back up just to highlight a couple of other events that are happening over the next few weeks. Oh, there's something in the chat room there. Is there another?
No, somebody's saying thanks.
Great. So we have an event this afternoon which very much continues this theme. How is data personalization transforming customer experience? So it's an interactive debate. So we, rather than one presentation, we have 4 short ones that will then be followed by an open discussion. So we will have Professor Karen Cham from the University of Brighton talking a lot about actually the customer experience management, often through the back end, sort of automation happening in warehouses and things like that, and how that's how data is changing the way that stock moves around, but also the implications there of 5G and how kind of ultra fast internet speeds might be using real-time data in a different way in order to be able to get things in front of people once they order them, and all sorts of things like that, which are really interesting. We've also got Pete Jenkins, CEO of Gamification Plus, talking about gamification in consumer models, and how again, sort of a lot of the nudge theory and behavioural change comes through gamifying data and personal data experiences. We have Sam Knowles, who has just released his second book called How to Be Insightful, and it's all about interpreting data through storytelling, and again has lots of examples of brands using personalisation to call for calls to action. And we have Joe Williams, who is the Director of Experience West Sussex, and will bring some really interesting insight to that debate, all around how the kind of experience and tourism economy is has probably been quite far behind in terms of using data, but how that whole sector is changing fast to enable people to personalise their experience and to curate their own holidays or staycations through access to various bits of data. So that will be a really interesting debate. So do come along this afternoon. If you haven't already booked a ticket, you can do that on the driverartsdriver.com website. We'd love to see you there. And then tomorrow we have a session in the morning all about the city of Brighton and Hove and how that has been using visitor data for renewal and recovery. So really drilling in on a case study, and it's as much about what they aren't doing and what they would like to do, as well as what they are doing. So it's a real look at sort of real-time thinking from an economic perspective around how to use data to essentially rebuild a city that's been very, very hard hit in the last few weeks and months. And then in the afternoon, we've got a really another really good case study of how crowdsourced data from thousands of people have been used to map London's streets, so that people walking around at night get a real-time kind of heat map, essentially, of where it's safe to walk, where crimes have not been reported recently, where people know kind of safe shortcuts, where places are well lit. And so it's a really interesting sort of public engagement exercise in helping to protect other people in terms of using intelligence. So that's Gillian Kowalchuk from Safe in the City, a tech entrepreneur, will be giving a presentation on that. So that'll be fantastic, I think, tomorrow afternoon. And then we have a couple more sessions in October, again with Pete Jenkins, all about gamification. We've only got a few tickets left on that. That's nearly sold out. And from University of Essex's Business and Data Research Centre, we've got to kind of bring it full circle back to where we've been this morning, looking at online shopping behaviour during COVID specifically and its impact on artificial intelligence. So that will be a really great companion piece to what you've seen this morning. So please do book on all of those, all completely free. And we would love to see you there, and all of those are available through driverartsdriver.com. In addition to that, there is a new online TV channel being launched, Connected Futures TV, via an organisation called Tech Circus, who are globally known for running interactive events and workshops all around data. And so any Driver Arts Driver participant can access a whole range of new workshops and courses that have been curated by Professor Karen Cham, that take all of this kind of wider knowledge that we're exploring through these events into much more kind of detailed software-led processes with hackathons and real examples of how to use things like the Gatwick Airport data that's available. So again, please do consider booking on some of those. I think they're going to be fantastic. So all of that at driverartsdriver.com and much more besides. Please do make sure that you visit and have a play around with it. But other than that, thank you very much again to Ali Goode. Thank you very much to all of you for coming along, and we will see you very soon.